We've all got stuff we don't want to think about right now. I'm sure that's why a lot of you are here watching this video. Maybe it's a conversation you've been putting off for weeks, a decision that's been sitting in the corner of your mind, or something smaller like a message you've left unread for so long that answering it now would feel more like an event than it has any right to be. Whatever it is, we've all gotten pretty creative with the way we avoid dealing with it. Avoidance is something that most humans are remarkably talented at. We're willing to do anything, be it scrolling, working, or just being busy at the most suspicious of times, all to avoid that thing that's been generating so much noise in the back of our heads. And if you avoid it long enough, it becomes second nature in a way that you won't even notice anymore. ODDTAXI is an anime that understands that type of avoidance. It's a series filled with people running from something they refuse to acknowledge, and never once does it shame them for it. Coming out all the way back in 2021, ODDTAXI is an anime original series written by Kazuya Konomoto, the same writer behind Seto wa Nutsumi, a series I did a video on a while back which you could feel free to check out after this. It follows Hiroshi Odokawa, a 41-year-old walrus taxi driver who lives alone, keeps to himself, and spends his time picking up passengers who he has conversations with while going about his deliberately uneventful life. But then a girl goes missing, and slowly, episode by episode, you start to understand that every single person in Odokawa's orbit is connected to that disappearance in some way, and that a lot of them are not quite who they appear to be. If you've been with this channel since its early years, chances are you've seen the old video I did on ODDTAXI while it was airing all those years ago, but don't go and watch it. It's like pretty rough and kinda cringe, but my sentiments about the series have not changed. I cannot overstate how well constructed this show is. Every detail matters, every seemingly throwaway conversation or panning shot ends up being load-bearing, weaving a web of connections between characters so tightly and carefully that the whole thing ends up getting 10 times better on a rewatch in a way that very few anime are able to do. And the dialogue? Man, the dialogue in this show is something special. It sounds like real people talking, nailing a certain kind of rhythm and naturalism that is so rare it almost feels like you're right there with them. This way of dialogue also brings out a lot of the comedy that hits with expertly placed setups and payoffs that land in a way that feels so effortless you won't even realize when you're laughing your guts out. It truly is one of the best anime of the decade, and it deserves every bit of praise it gets. So, in order to talk in depth about what ODDTAXI does with Avoidance, I'll be going into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen the series yet and want to go into it blind, which I highly recommend you do, this is a great excuse to binge it now. Before I get into the characters, first I need to talk about the taxi, because the taxi is arguably the most important character in the series. Let me cook. Think about what a taxi is. It's a vehicle whose entire purpose is motion. It exists to take people from where they are to somewhere else, a place they've chosen, a place they need to be. It doesn't stop unless someone tells it to. It is, by design, always in transit. And ODDTAXI fills that taxi with people who are always in motion but never really going anywhere. Every passenger who hops into Odokawa's cab is moving. They have somewhere to be, something they're heading towards, but underneath all that motion, they are completely and definitely stuck. They are in transit in the most literal sense, traveling between the thing they can't face and the place they keep redirecting themselves to instead. The taxi is this show's central metaphor made physical. A vehicle full of people who are running, driven by a man who is running harder than any of them. But we'll get into him later. The characters in ODDTAXI are all running, but they aren't running from the same thing, so I want to break them down into 3 groups, and I won't be covering everyone, just the ones whose arcs I find the most interesting. The first group are the people running from their own insignificance. Kabusawa is a college student whose entire personality has been reorganized around the pursuit of virality. He's not even chasing it because he wants to be famous, he's only doing so because all his friends have gone viral. He's not trying to use virality as a way to achieve something, he just wants to see the numbers go up. He wants the confirmation that people are looking at him. He gets a taste of it early on and does exactly what you'd expect. He gets drunk on it. The attention and power that comes with being the person everyone is talking about completely sucks him in, and when that moment passes, as it always does, he doesn't step back to reflect, he doesn't let it go, and he doesn't move on with his life. He doubles down, becoming a grifter manufacturing content and controversy all to chase that rush of seeing the numbers go up. What Kabusawa is running from is the possibility that he's just an ordinary dude, that without the numbers and the attention, without the moment that everyone is talking about, he's just another person in a city full of people that don't particularly care, That dread is so foundational to who he is, he ends up building an entire lifestyle around never having to confirm it. Like, who prints a tweet and hangs it on their wall for motivation? His arc ends in a strange but oddly satisfying way. Dobu, the gang member of all people, the one who Kabasawa had been chasing in the name of his fake sense of justice, sits him down and gives him the talk he's needed. Calling him out on his pretentious bullshit, his lack of self-esteem and confidence, telling him to accept that he's just a normal guy. Kabasawa had spent the series hating himself for who he is and desperately wanted to get rid of his old self. His conclusion is him accepting his painful mediocrity, the exact conclusion he's been running from. It's a moment that isn't all that triumphant. Much like him, it's a rather ordinary scene of just a man bowing his head and living with the person he is now. Shibagaki is the other half of the Homo sapien comedy duo whose dynamic has become quietly unbearable as his partner, Baba, has started to pull ahead. Baba is someone who's been adapting to the modern times, evolving his style, and figuring out what the new generation of comedy audiences respond to. Shibagaki meanwhile is being left behind, and instead of reckoning that, he blames the audience. He resents them for changing, he resents comedy for changing, he resents everything except the person he needs to blame, which is himself. He knows on some level that he's the one holding the duo back. The anime makes it really clear with the way other characters straight up point it out. But even after being told, he still refuses to accept it, redirecting that resentment which leads to friction and the performance of someone who simply disagrees with the direction things are going, rather than admitting he's someone terrified of being left behind. There's even this one character, a high schooler who's a huge fan of the duo, that acknowledges Shibagaki's frustrations. However, what he does is act as a dark reflection of him, agreeing and trying to reinforce the stagnation Shibagaki is going through, even opting to take over as his new comedy partner. However, Shibagaki shuts him down. His resolution is coming to terms with the fact that he does need Baba in spite of everything. He's willing to change if it means sticking with his comedy partner, and Baba accepts him regardless. They are, in the truest form, partners. And then there's Tanaka, who just might be my favorite character in the entire anime. He got into the eraser collecting craze when he was in middle school, a fad that swept through his entire school, but he ended up falling behind the other kids with rarer erasers. He desperately tried to compete, a desperation that led him to blowing his father's 100,000 yen at an auction site trying to get his super limited, one-of-a-kind eraser, but it never arrived. He was scammed, and the humiliation took root somewhere deep in his soul. As an adult, he finds himself pulled into a gacha game called Zuden, chasing the SSR Dodo, locked into a one-side competition with a player named Ditch11, the same username that scammed him out of 100k all those years ago. And 4 years later, he's still unable to get the Dodo. With gacha rates this bad, one would think he was playing Fate's Grand Order. His inability to get the Dodo causes him to spiral, spending millions of yen on the game in the span of those 4 years. And when he does eventually get the Dodo, he loses it almost immediately, and after that, all he can do is look for someone to blame. Anyone, everyone, except himself. What makes his arc so unfortunate is that when he finally comes face to face with Ditch11, his self-proclaimed rival who turns out to be Dobu of all people, the contrast is stark and painful. To Tanaka, this was everything to him. 16 years of his life holding a grudge that goes all the way back to his childhood. His identity was built around finally winning against this person who took so much from him. But to Dobu, this was just a passing hobby. He doesn't even remember playing the game. That asymmetry is brutal, and it's the anime's honest observation about avoidance. Sometimes the things you've been running towards your whole life turn out to have never even been looking back at you. Goals are often one-sided, and this shatters the idea that the thing you're striving for is waiting for you to come get it. The second group are the people running from guilt. Shirakawa is a nurse whose guilt is structural. She used to date Dobu and came out of the relationship deep in serious debt. I'm talking millions. Rather than confront that debt or find a way out of it on her own terms, she built an entire system around managing it. She steals medication from her clinic for Dobu to sell off, she acts as his pawn, using her proximity to Odokawa to gather information. Everything she does is in service to the debt she can't escape from. Her avoidance and guilt disguise themselves as a strange sense of loyalty. She frames her actions as making hard choices because she has no other options. And while there is some truth to that, the anime makes it clear that some of what keeps her in that position is her unwillingness to look directly at what she's complicit in. She never fully breaks out of it on her own. Odokawa stepping in to resolve the debt is what sets her free, But what the anime gives her in the end is the choice to actually help him despite his attempts to push her away. She no longer ignores the things she's done in the past, and while she can't take it back, she decides for herself what she does next. This culminates in her being the first one to dive into the water to rescue Odokawa from his sinking taxi at the end, proving her commitment to changing and wanting to be there for him. Goriki, Odokawa's doctor friend, is carrying a different kind of guilt. He's known for a long time that there was something fundamentally wrong with Odokawa, but rather than treat him, he chose to help him keep that thing at bay. Goriki's help only worked to keep Odokawa functional rather than push him towards the confrontation he genuinely needed. His anticipation might be the most consequential choice in the whole series because everything that happens across the 13 episodes in a way can be traced back to Odokawa's visual agnosia. It's not like Goriki does this out of malice, it just took him a long time to figure out how to help and how to make things right. So in the end, all he could do was make it manageable for our favorite taxi driver. What redeems him is that he eventually stops trying to manage the issue but actually starts trying. Towards the end, Goriki takes the initiative to dig into Odokawa's past trauma to try and help him, not as a doctor looking out for a patient, but as a friend showing up for someone who needed them to show up years ago. And then there's Dobu, who is something else entirely. Dobu's guilt is complicated in the fact that he doesn't fully experience it as guilt. He's a man dedicated to his boss who only asks them for one thing, to bring him money. They can do it however they like, they just shouldn't kill anyone. And Dobu has structured his entire moral universe around that one rule. He follows it, he doesn't kill, and therefore, in his understanding of himself, he's not a bad person. The consequences of his actions don't really register to him because he doesn't process them as things he should be responsible for. His rivalry with Yano, who seems to always one-up him, and his drive to secure the 1 billion yen before Yano does, becomes the embodiment of everything he can't look at directly. He thinks he's chasing ambition, but he's actually running from the slowly accumulating weight of his actions, which he does eventually pay for. The cool thing about Dobu is that he's not some cruel, ruthless gangster. In fact, he's surprisingly emotionally mature. From the way he handles Kabasawa to the way he interacts with Odokawa, you can tell that there's a lot more to him. Too bad he can't really take the time to look at himself introspectively. So if you've been enjoying this video so far, please consider hitting that like button as well as subscribing. 96% of all of you who watch my videos are not subscribed, so if you enjoy content like this and want to see more like it, it's only logical you do so. Many thanks if you do. Alright, on to the last and most important group of characters. The third group are those running from grief, and this is where the anime's emotional core is at. Kakihana is Odokawa's childhood friend, and watching him across the series is such a quietly painful experience. He's a janitor, he's lonely, and he's desperate for love in a way that goes past the point of good judgment. This desperation gets him pulled into a badger scam. He falls for romance fabricated to ring him for everything he's worth, so in order to keep up appearances after lying on his dating profile about his income, he goes into major debt because he thinks the truth of who he is won't be enough. Kakihana is so afraid of the grief that comes with being alone that it prevents him from seeing that the person he goes on a few dates with, Shiho, is clearly not interested in him. Perhaps he purposefully blinds himself from the truth because if he didn't avoid it, he'd be forced to sit with the confirmation that nobody actually wants him and that loneliness is what he just cannot live with. What I love about how ODDTAXI handles Kakihana is that it never once laughs at him for doing what he's doing. Like yeah, going into generational debt all in the name of love is a bad move, but it doesn't portray it as something to laugh at him for. There is nothing wrong in wanting love. The anime doesn't make you feel superior to him for the choices he's making because there is just so much relatability behind it. When he finally gets a moment to reflect on himself, we see him deeply contemplate giving up on love. There are no words in the scene, but you just know. And for a brief moment he does, throwing away the ring he wanted to use to propose to the girl who he had only gone on 2 dates with. But he immediately changes his mind, deciding he really does want to love and be loved. It's human and he can't deny that part of himself, so he picks himself up. He gets a second job and actually starts moving with no big fanfare or dramatic speech. At the end, we see him at a much better place than when he was at the start, though he's in mountains of debts. Nikaido, the lead idol of Mystery Kiss, is a perfectionist running from the grief of losing something, specifically something you have built your entire identity around. She works hard, dedicating herself to her group and cares for it in a way any perfectionist would. But then, Mitsuya arrives, someone who is better than her in every way and is chosen to be the lead of the group out of nowhere. And Nikaido has to reckon with what it means to no longer be the best person in the room, even going so far as wanting to kill Mitsuya. But then she finds Mitsuya's dead body, and all that grief compounds into something Nikaido can only cope with by pushing the group further, channeling every bit of that loss into protecting the group at all costs, making sure Mitsuya's death wasn't for nothing. Her avoidance looks like dedication from the outside, but deep down, she's just a person who hadn't stopped running since the moment she realized she wasn't irreplaceable. And finally, we have Odokawa. Odokawa is what happens when avoidance goes all the way. He has taken running from grief further than anyone else in the anime, because he hasn't just built behaviors around his grief, he's built an entirely different way of perceiving reality. His visual agnosia, triggered by the childhood trauma of witnessing his mother's murder-suicide, means he doesn't see people as people, but as animals. And because the entire anime is filtered through his perception, we too see them as animals. And what this does is soften the reality of the weight of the lives of the characters we watch. Because they're animals, we don't get to fully relate with them and just see them and the world they live in as a tad bit whimsical, even when we're watching a mandrill beat another animal to a bloody pulp. That's intentional by design, because much like Odokawa, we are prevented from truly connecting with them. Like, Odokawa does have friends, but it always feels like there's some kind of wall between him and them, and when we do find out about his trauma, you come to understand that this is his way of protecting himself, but it has also ended up being a prison. When the walls finally come down, Odokawa becomes a different person. It's not a change that happens overnight, as we've been watching him over the course of the anime connect with others and stick his neck out for people he'd only met once or twice. When I first watched the anime while it was airing, I found it strange how his condition gets cured from almost drowning, but upon rewatching it for this video, I saw this whole moment in an entirely different light. What leads up to this moment is Odokawa risking his life for so many people, one of which being a guy he randomly picked up. This was the ultimate form of connection for him. His trauma had prevented him from seeing people as people and connecting with them. But by doing this for them, he's able to let go of that past and accept them for who they are. This also marks his growth with one of the most perfect callbacks I have seen in recent anime. In the first episode, Odokawa falls asleep in his taxi but is jolted awake because of the flashback he gets of his mother's murder-suicide. It's the thing that prevents him from sleeping, it's the thing he's running from. But in the final episode, he falls asleep in his taxi and wakes up peacefully. That's it. After all that motion, the passengers, the conversations, the conspiracies, and the grief, the taxi finally arrives, no longer running. A cool little thing ODDTAXI does is how there's a pattern in almost all the characters and how their arcs end. Almost every character's arc concludes with them arriving back at themselves. Not as a new version of themselves or some upgraded person who has left behind their old self, they just become themselves. The person they always were, but this time seeing who they are clearly. It's like taking the long way around a roundabout and ending back at the road you started on. All that motion, all that movement, and you're back in the beginning, but this time you can see it for what it is. ODDTAXI never tells you to stop running. It doesn't stand in front of the characters and lecture them about their avoidance or demand that they face these things before they are ready. It just rides alongside them, watches them, and lets you see the shape of what they are carrying and why. And somewhere in all that patience, it asks you the same question it asks all of them. Where are you going? And are you sure that's where you actually want to end up? That'll be it for this video. I'm sure some of you already have one or two things to say about the other characters I didn't cover, so I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, this has been your very favorite slice of bread. Stay toasty.